The Legend of Zelda is an incredibly well-known and beloved franchise across the world, sporting a massive 29 titles, including the remakes, with the very first Zelda game being released to the world on the Famicom platform all the way back in 1986, a whopping 38 years ago. But with any dedicated fanbase, there is only so many times you can replay a game before you start to get creative with it. So today I'll be covering the hardest challenges for some of the Legend of Zelda games. Also, a quick warning, this video will contain some spoilers. Starting with A Link to the Past. Released back in 1991 on the SNES, A Link to the Past quickly became a favourite for a lot of fans. The game is set in the land of Hyrule with a familiar plotline. Zelda needs to be saved, and Link is ready to volunteer as tribute. Link is set on a task of retrieving the 3 pendants of power, wisdom, and courage to unlock the Master Sword. But after returning to the sanctuary where Zelda is hiding, he finds that she's been kidnapped and taken to the Dark World. Once there, Link sets about freeing the 7 maidens contained within crystals, one of which being Zelda, to unlock his path to Ganon's tower. Link defeats Ganon and uses the Triforce like the Infinity Stones to wish the world back to normal. There is a lot of potential for some very interesting challenges in this game, and the hardest one that I could find was done by the King of Skill. During their playthrough, they restricted themselves to the following rules: no sword upgrades, no shield upgrades, no tunic upgrades, no half magic meter, no additional items that aren't required, no item upgrades, and no heart containers excluding the ones required after defeating bosses. When a game gives you upgrades, it's usually because you'll need them, so removing those upgrades is always a surefire way to increase the difficulty of your playthrough, and King of Skill does an excellent job showcasing this and completing it. Ocarina of Time is my favourite game of all time. Releasing in 1998 for the Nintendo 64 console, it was the first steps into the 3D world for the Legend of Zelda franchise. It's also infamous in the Zelda community for being the game that split the timeline and started making things real complicated for the die-hard fans. But that's a whole other subject that would take way too long to dive into. In this game, we start out as a kid in Kokiri Forest that just doesn't quite fit in. We don't have our own fairy like everyone else that lives here, and we also suffer from that small problem known as aging, which is a real bummer. We are summoned to the Great Deku Tree where we are warned of a great evil and set on a task of discovering and unrooting it. We eventually meet Zelda after sneaking past her at best mediocre security, and she tells us of her premonition and how it ties into the man standing before us, Ganondorf. Zelda sends us off to collect the 3 stones needed to unlock the Doors of Time and secure the Triforce, which we can then use to defeat Ganon and rid Hyrule of his evil. Until we arrive back to the castle to find Zelda fleeing on horseback being pursued by Ganon. She throws us her magical ocarina, and we make our way to the Doors of Time. Upon opening the doors, we are rudely interrupted by Ganon, who had been waiting to steal the Triforce. He makes off with the Triforce of Power, and we are put to sleep for 7 years until we are old enough to face the evil now placed before us. But what if we could prevent any of that from happening in the first place? What if there was a way to obtain the full Triforce, like Zelda had originally planned? Now, for this list, I really wanted to stay away from modding and speedrunning, and stick to the pure base game challenges, but I had to make a technical exception here because it's so unique that I had to talk about it. Obtaining the full Triforce was a fan theory for years, and there was extensive game research and code diving to try and find a way to make it a reality. And after 23 years since the game's release, it was finally achieved. The Triforce Percent was a 3-year-long journey that used urban legends based on beta content from Ocarina of Time to create a new story, in which Link is able to obtain different songs, items, fight unique bosses, and visit new locations, as well as time travel so far into the future that he becomes Link from Breath of the Wild. I'm not even joking. But the reason I am including this is because the base game itself wasn't actually altered. The creators used ACE, or Arbitrary Code Execution, to inject over 2 million code inputs through a TASBot while playing the game to pull this off. I'm listing it as the hardest challenge for this game because the amount of time and resources and dedication to actually pull this off is kind of insane. I highly recommend watching SwankyBox's video on this. It's super interesting and does an excellent job of explaining how it came to be. Majora's Mask is honestly one of the most unique and interesting Zelda games I have ever played, and it is criminally underrated. Releasing in 2000 on the Nintendo 64, just 2 years after Ocarina of Time, it was a direct sequel to its predecessor. and I like to refer to it as the Evangelion of Zelda games because it isn't afraid to tackle the heavier subjects and get just a little bit weird with it. The game starts out with Kid Link riding Epona through the woods when he is attacked by the Skull Kid, who steals not only his ocarina, but also his horse, the Hyrule equivalent of being carjacked. After doing some parkour through the woods, Link catches up to the Skull Kid, only to be turned into a Deku Scrub. We are forced to play out the beginning of the game in Clocktown in the land of Termina, not so subtle name, where we have to find a way to un-Deku Scrubify ourselves and return to being human. During this process, we learn about the Skull Kid's newly obtained powers, and that if we don't find a way to stop him in just 3 days, well, the moon will literally crash into the earth and destroy everything. No pressure. Once we are restored to our human state, we then head to the 4 locations needed to gain the powers to stop the Skull Kid's plans of Moonfall, while collecting masks along the way, allowing us also to turn into a Zora, Goron, and even a Giant. With the 4 evils defeated and some new long-legged friends to help, we return to stop the moon falling. With its plan thwarted, the mask abandons the Skull Kid and instead finds a new host, the moon. We head inside the moon and proceed to have the most maniacal final battle with Majora, and really it is a fitting way to end the game. Anyone who has ever played Majora's Mask knows the hardest challenge in this game is trying not to have a panic attack as the timer clicks over to a new day, and you're met with final day 24 hours remain while you're in the middle of completing a dungeon. But what if you took it one step further, dialed the anxiety up to 11, and tried to complete the entire game within the 3-day cycle? For context, the entire 3-day cycle takes about 54 minutes to complete, and this game includes a water temple, so 54 minutes doesn't exactly sound possible. Well, that's exactly what Smithic did, and why I consider it the hardest challenge for Majora's Mask. For this challenge, the rules were actually kind of simple. Complete the game in the 3-day time cycle, no using the Song of Time to reset to the first day, and no glitches. It sounds insane, and honestly it really is. The key to pulling off this challenge is the use of the inverted Song of Time, where you play the Song of Time backwards, and it slows the flow of time from a mere 54 minutes to a beefy 3 hours to complete the game. Yeah, that's still not exactly a lot of time, and achieving this challenge takes a lot of skill. I cannot recommend Smithic's video enough for this, where he completes the challenge, and honestly watching how he does so will keep you hooked, I promise. Moving forward, and we are gifted with Twilight Princess, coming into our homes on both GameCube and on the Nintendo Wii in 2006, introducing a new experience to gamers through the janky ways of motion controls. I assure you, 10-year-old me thought being able to go fishing, aim the bow, and chop down enemies was the single coolest gaming experience the world had ever seen, and I wasn't the only one who thought this. Winning multiple awards for Best Action Adventure Game and Best Score, the unique gameplay had caught the world's attention. The story starts with a quiet and peaceful village life, where we see Link going about his chores until the village is stormed by a horde of bokoblins. Link is rendered unconscious, the village children are stolen, and the exit to the village is shrouded by a wall of twilight. Link is pulled through by a mysterious hand, and we witness Link being choked out by a monster before transforming into a wolf and collapsing. We awaken in a cell and are greeted by a small imp named Midna, who promptly becomes our companion for the remainder of the game. She guides us out of the cell and through a castle all the way to a chamber in the highest room in the tallest tower, where we meet Princess Zelda. Some story exposition happens, and we are sent to remove the Twilight from Hyrule and return it to the light, saving everyone within. After doing so, we travel to the realm of Twilight and fight the usurper King Zant before returning to Hyrule and fighting Ganon in 3 different forms. Now, you would think with such a large and expansive game, the challenges would get all kinds of crazy, and you would be correct. Kind of. Twilight Princess is one of those rare gems where things are just silly enough and the fans are crazy enough to make magic happen. And again, I really wanted to stay away from speedrunning, but this speedrun isn't exactly fast. I give to you the low percent speedrun. Now, anyone familiar with speedruns knows that there are multiple categories, and the goal for each of them, as the name implies, is to complete the game as fast as possible within each category's restrictions. And for low percent, the restrictions are to complete the game as fast as possible while collecting as little as possible. Now, not only does this run implement speedrunning, but it also has a rather unique aspect to it. You have to stare at rupees for around 17 hours. So unless you have the extreme talent of godlike patience, this challenge is a real doozy to complete. Lowest Percent has a fantastic video explaining why and how this works, so I seriously recommend checking out their video on it. Breath of the Wild is a game that hardly requires an introduction. Released on both the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch in 2017, Breath of the Wild took the world by storm with Nintendo's drastic new approach to the Zelda franchise. By completely stripping back all the restrictions of the typical linear gameplay we are all too familiar with in the Zelda universe, Breath of the Wild gave us a completely open world experience and the freedom to run straight to the final boss almost immediately if you really wanted to. It was a brave leap for Nintendo to take with one of their largest games, but it definitely paid off, receiving universal praise and quickly becoming the highest selling Zelda game still to this day. The game itself follows the story of Link, who has lost his memory after the world's longest nap, and after some initial guidance from a friendly ghost, is directed to find some old friends and set their spirits free, while also freeing their respective regions from the blight placed upon them. At the same time, we can also choose to search out significant locations from our past to unlock our forgotten memories, and piece together how the world we currently find ourselves in came to be. After doing so, Link makes his way towards the castle to have a showdown against the big bad Ganondorf, and ultimately, save Zelda. If you completed all 4 regions before arriving at the castle, you fight Ganon directly. If not, you have to fight the blight from each region you failed to complete before fighting Ganon, and if you're underprepared, that can be a challenge in its own right. After defeating Ganon with a little help from Zelda herself, we are left with a final scene with the princess, which again changes depending on whether or not you collected all the forgotten memories. Now, with this game being completely open world, the story really changes depending on how you play the game, and with that being said, the open world aspect really bumped up the amount of ways to play the game, which in turn bumped up the amount of challenge runs possible. Seriously, there are hundreds of different challenges you could do for this game, each one unique and challenging in its own way, but I think the hardest of the lot is completing the entire game without weapons. Completing this challenge requires the use of speedrun techniques to get through certain shrines, extensive knowledge of the game, and a whole lot of creativity using stasis, magnesis, and cryonis. Smallant does a fantastic job crafting and completing this challenge, and his video is 100% worth the watch to see how he pulled off such a unique challenge. Before we jump into the final challenge, remember to like and subscribe if you have enjoyed the video, and leave a comment letting me know if you agree or disagree with my choices. Tears of the Kingdom had massive shoes to fill. With Breath of the Wild being such a global success, all eyes were on the sequel to be everything Breath of the Wild was, and so much more. Releasing in 2023 exclusively on the Switch, a whole 6 years after Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom had Zelda fans on the edge of their seats, and the response was, well, kind of mixed. A lot of people really enjoyed the game, and some felt it failed to capture the same magic as its predecessor. Tears of the Kingdom introduced new abilities to the game, which ultimately gave the players even more freedom than they previously had in Breath of the Wild. The story starts with Link and Zelda exploring the castle ruins following the defeat of Ganon, when they stumble across an old shriveled body with an evil presence. The body awakens and a familiar fear greets us. Ganon awakes and makes short work of the Master Sword, shattering the evil destroying blade. Without weapons and without hope, Zelda is lost to the abyss, and Link is taken to the sky by a mysterious force. Once again, Link is guided by a friendly ghost and told to essentially redo Breath of the Wild again, but with the inclusion of the sky and the depths. This has us travelling across, albeit a slightly changed Hyrule, to all the familiar locations and helping familiar faces to restore peace once again. Once we are ready to face off against Ganon in his restored form, we must make our way deep into the caverns below Hyrule Castle, defeat his hordes of evil in a Hyrule Warriors-esque fight, before facing our greatest enemy in his Demon King form. And this time, instead of turning into his usual Dark Beast form upon defeat, we are gifted with the cinematic final fight against the Demon Dragon. Now, a lot of the same challenges that exist in Breath of the Wild exist in Tears of the Kingdom as well, and yes, Smallland has even managed to complete Tears of the Kingdom without using weapons. However, that doesn't mean it's the hardest challenge twice over. No, instead I think the true hardest challenge here is 100% completion of the game, damageless. Tears of the Kingdom indeed gives you more freedom than Breath of the Wild, but with that there are also more opportunities to get hurt. On the ground, everything wants to hurt you. Underground, everything wants to hurt you. And can you believe it, in the sky, everything wants to hurt you. Even the environment wants to hurt you. Completing this challenge took DJ Carmichael a massive 42 hours spread across a 6-part series to complete. If you have a weekend with nothing to binge and enjoy some Zelda content, I recommend checking out their videos. Did you enjoy the video? Agree or disagree with my list? Let me know in the comments, and thank you all so much for watching.